that interviewer where she had such a great sense that that there was an alien agenda here. They're talking about removing of the nitrogen, removing the carbon dioxide. And now it would basically be removing our oxygen, the trees, burying trees, removing our oxygen. So Mike Adams said, well, they want to remove our atmosphere. Who wants to remove our atmosphere? Well, it's a non-breathing species that absorbs nutrients through their skin, and having carbon dioxide directly in contact with their skin is like poisoning them. There's so much of free will that has gone into a dark direction that we can't be held responsible. We can't fix it. The people who really understand the deepness of the difficulties on this planet, and especially how the aliens have compromised us through screwing around with our DNA and those injections, all the stuff that's happening, all has to be wiped away. And exactly how God is going to separate the wheat from the chaff. So we have a completely extraordinary document that we can now present to these alien species through their emissaries who are able to show up on our tarmacs. They can fly in on a ship. We can hand them the Urantia Book. We can outline exactly what they say, which is if their planets are doomed, there will be another planet that they will be taken to in the event that they are able to survive. Because once a civilization has taken hold on a planet, they have to continue irrespective of the survival of that planet. They don't know that, but we know that from the Urantia Book. So we have to go back in our negotiation. We have to hand them the Urantia Book. We have to hand them that knowledge that they need to return not to their planetary prince, who is in league with Lucifer. They have to go above that to their Melchizedeks, to other spirit beings who they probably have contact with, to find out, in fact, is there an exit strategy, or do we have to take over this planet, and kill all the humans on the planet? Which was the trade. We've already given up a million people a year or more, and our children, to these aliens as a food source. We're done with that, and they never should have been in that position. The Pentagon and Eisenhower only agreed to it because they were afraid of their technology, and what that represented to them was an opportunity of signing a treaty that would buy them time. They could learn about the technology, gear up, learn their weapons, learn how the ships work. And perhaps at the end of the treaty, which is what's coming now, at that end, they would be in a position to perhaps push back, or I don't know what their end game is. It looks like it's to remove our all our oxygen and nitrogen, and all that is going to be gone. And so it seems like on a certain level, they're acquiescing to the potential that they have no way of fighting back. So we need to have the Pentagon set up a meeting with with those who they have contact with. There are the two that showed up on the tarmac in '54. Both of them sort of belonged on this planet. One was an actual Aryan. They still exist as a group. And the other was either a hybrid Aryan and what they call a Nordic, which is really a species called the Material Sons, which is what Adam and Eve were. They were 8 feet tall, blonde hair, blue-eyed, with elongated skulls. Those are the Material Sons, and their whole thing on this planet was to improve us genetically. So this was a planned thing, and it was because we have a problem on our planet, which is that bacteria and fungus are out of control to a large degree. But they had planned that Adam and Eve would give us their blood plasma, what they called the violet blood, and the violet blood was immune to bacterial and fungal infections. So we would be able to get rid of a lot of terrible diseases that we've had to fight off in our evolution. It would have been handled by the fact that Adam and Eve were supposed to create 1 million children, and then those 1 million children would then intermarry and interact with the rest of the world, their genetics, and that would give us immunity to all the infections that we suffer under. So that didn't happen.
I want to get your take. Was Jesus an actual ET that came here in our physical form?
Absolutely. He is the creator of this local universe. He appeared on different planets as different orders during the incarnations. The incarnations apparently took 1 billion years to do all 7. And this was the final one from 2,000 years ago, but he had to live the life of all of his created beings, the Melchizedeks, the Material Sons, the Midway creatures, all these beings. He had to live their life to understand them and be a sympathetic ruler.
Beyond Beyond the Forbidden.
Welcome to Beyond the Forbidden. Today on the show, I got David Lee Hubbard. A lot of you may not know who he is, but he's been around the scenes for a while. But I think he's going to have a very interesting story to tell. I'm going to let him describe a little bit about him, and we're going to get into his book, An American 007, The Double Life of Jeffrey Lew. It's music and fine arts mogul, CIA secret agent with a license to kill. It's going to be fascinating with you, David. Welcome to Beyond the Forbidden. I appreciate you coming on the show.
Oh, really great for having me. I appreciate it as well.
So I guess, we got to do this. So go ahead and describe a little about yourself and a little bit about your background. Take as long as you want. I'm always here. So this show is for the guests. So right. Describe a little bit about yourself, from the past and what led you to your interest into some of the topics that you talk about within your book, with the Urantia Book, and everything else within the book also, and what led you to the path that inspired you to write the book today.
Well, to start with, this whole idea of the 007 and Jeffrey Lew, he was someone who was investigating me after I'd written a book, and it was released in '99 called Coming to Order, The New World Order and the Great White Brotherhood. And I presented in a speech in Vancouver, and consequently, because of that speech and the publishing of that book, I fell under the microscope of certain agencies like the CIA. And when I came down to Florida for a conference of the Urantia Book, that's where I met Jeffrey Lew. We were both on the same stage, and he had just recently read the Urantia Book. And an interesting occurrence happened at the end of the meeting where we went out and filled up our cars with gas. And while that was going on, a gust of wind blew my door open slightly, just enough that I was able to see out of the corner of my eye a cameo in my rearview mirror of someone photographing me. And I just kept filling my gas and realizing that someone obviously is taking a little bit extraordinary interest in me. It's something I'd never had happen to me, as someone surreptitiously photographing me. And I had recently been working with I would say military intelligence and in Canada and Britain. And so I was on high alert, and I decided I would sort of keep an eye on this particular individual, and we became friends. I invited myself over just about to find out exactly, who he was, what his background was. And about after 2 years, he took me over to a wall in his study, and he pushed this bookcase, a floor-to-ceiling bookcase, and it opened up. And inside of that room, that hidden room, was an arsenal of weapons like rocket launchers, bazookas, you name it. It was like literally an arsenal. And after I spent about a minute sort of perusing these weapons on the wall, I realized that he was standing behind me the whole time. And he looked at me straight in the eye, and he said to me, "And one day I'm going to save your life." So that was really the beginning of him kind of trusting me, that he was a CIA agent.
What year was this, David?
2004. I had just moved down to Florida, and I had met a young woman on the beach, and we landed up getting married and having a child. So I have actually a 17-year-old at my late age. But my relationship with Jeffrey Lew continued ultimately for 20 years. And we exchanged talents along the way. I did all kinds of projects for him, and he did things for me. He trained me in certain martial arts, how to, because I'm a short person and I need to be able to defend myself in a way that I guess others here in America would reach for a gun. I'm a believer in what Jesus said, which is, you live by the sword, you die by the sword. So I've been always very reticent to pick up a gun. But he did train me. He gave me a BB gun and said that if you're going to be running, turn around and fire a couple of BBs in their face and they'll leave you alone. So that's my form of defense. But he sort of prepared me for many, many missions. He prepared me for going up and giving a presentation of the technology I developed for the Canadian British military, which is strengthening technology that I developed working alongside what I guess it looks like someone who has talked previously on one of your interviews, talking about individuals on the moon. Well, I actually was working with the military with individuals on the moon. It's a real deal, and they really are there. They're a non-breathing species. We call them the non-breathers. It's in the Urantia book. And it was because of Jeffrey's experience with the CIA and being trained in something called the Silva mind control, similar to my background, having a knowledge of the non-breathers in the Urantia book, as well as Silva mind control, gives you the ability to do what they call an active form of meditation. And in that active form of meditation, you are psychically reaching out. And this type of telepathy is exactly what the non-breathers in the moon use. So if you display the ability to be able to reach out, because they can listen to all of us, but we can't listen to them. So if you have that ability to do that, and I believe most people can actually be trained, it's something that is native to us. But I showed the abilities, exceptional abilities, and so did Jeffrey. When Jeffrey was brought into the CIA in the 60s by Rockefeller, he was offered to work on the alien situation. He read the Greada Treaty several times and gave it to other people to read. So he was extremely familiar with the document. And but there were things within the document that he found so repugnant that he refused to work with them, and consequently took a pass. And his life story, which is in the book, is all very interesting. But it turned out to be his deathbed confession about that Greada Treaty that is a revelatory moment for us who haven't had a chance to read that document, find out. Most people think it's not true, or White's tale. But when I knew it was absolutely 100% is when Mike Adams had an interview of a fellow named David Wilcox. And in that interview, David said, when talking about the reptilians, he said point blank, they want to eat us. And those are the exact words that Jeffrey used. And the idea that these two completely different individuals never having any type of contact, that's another individual Jeffrey must have had dealings with at that early stage. And consequently, as at the end of his life, like Jeffrey was, and disclose that to David Wilcox, which is the only way that information could have made it to him. So that confirmed it, and that coupled with an interview I saw with Pastor Scarlett with Dr. Carrie Maude, that interview where she had such a great sense that that there was an alien agenda here. You know, they're talking about removing of the nitrogen, removing the carbon dioxide. And now it would basically be removing our oxygen, the trees, burying trees, removing our oxygen. So Mike Adams said, well, they want to remove our atmosphere. Who wants to remove our atmosphere? Well, it's a non-breathing species that absorbs nutrients through their skin, and having carbon dioxide directly in contact with their skin is like poisoning them. So they can't tolerate it. So without knowing that there's a non-breathing species, which our government, well, the American government, I'm a Canadian, but the American government, basically, Eisenhower and the Pentagon have engaged in, is something that, because of the Urantia book, can be entirely scrapped. And I think it's such a critical thing for us to understand that. It's something the Pentagon doesn't know. They don't know the strategy that could be adopted, which is in the Urantia book, at least the knowledge of interplanetary relations, and the fact that we are in quarantine because of our involvement with the Lucifer Rebellion. So there are a number of other planets, and this is a species, these non-breathers, they obviously have a division, just like we have a division. We have the occult that pursues these things. Well, they have an occult, and that group is called the Plasmatics. They're the other treaty signers, but they are of a similar species in origin, undoubtedly, because they are extremely rare, these non-breathing species. So the fact that we are in contact with two of them, and one of them appears to follow God's rulings and Jesus' rulings, which is that we're kept as a quarantine planet. The fact that they're recognizing that, and they only offer help if we reach out and ask for their help. Consequently, we have to recognize that just like we have these divisions on our planet, it's a divide and conquer planet. They are up against the exact same situation, these alien species. So when people talk about, well, that we should extend a hand, all these things we talk about aliens, people are no understanding about the origins of these particular races, which have been around with us for over 4.5 billion years. So they're an ancient, ancient race. And they've been watching us develop all of these 4.5 billion years since the inception of our local universe. All of that information is in the Urantia book, which is totally revelatory. The book was wrestled into the public domain by a wealthy reader of the Urantia book and his lawyers in Supreme Court. And in Supreme Court, we got the 7 trustees in the foundation to admit that they knew the writers were all extraterrestrials. And consequently, in Supreme Court in 2002, the judge ruled that the Urantia Foundation no longer had a right to hold on to a patent or copyright or anything that they were hanging on to, except maybe a trademark. They trademarked Jesus 3 concentric blue rings. So they still hang on to that. But other than that, the book is out in the public domain. It's on the internet. It's been translated to over 25 languages. So this is a well-exposed document. But this was published in 1955 with all this incredible information. But the treaty was signed in 1954. And in fairness to Eisenhower and the Pentagon, they had no knowledge of the Urantia book and the fact that there was a completely different posture that we could have taken in our negotiation. And that posture would have been, get the hell off of our planet. And that would have been it. That still is going to be our posture. The only difference is now we're going to say, get the hell off our planet, but leave the technology, which was the trade. We've already given up a million people a year or more and our children to these aliens as a food source. We're done with that. And they never should have been in that position. The Pentagon and Eisenhower only agreed to it because they were afraid of their technology and what that represented to them was an opportunity of signing a treaty that would buy them time. They could learn about the technology, gear up, learn their weapons, learn how the ships worked. And perhaps at the end of the treaty, which is what's coming now, at that end, they would be in a position to perhaps push back, or I don't know what their end game is. It looks like it's to remove our all our oxygen and nitrogen and all that is going to be gone. And so it seems like on a certain level, they're acquiescing to the potential that they have no way of fighting back. But once again, these people, these elites, they are not reading the Urantia book. If they were reading the Urantia book, they would be following Jesus and they would be a completely different being. Jesus would have renewed their minds, but they're living in the truth. My book talks about how an evil spirit takes over Jeffrey and what that was like, how that took place and what it took for him to shed that evil spirit. It actually brought on, what's it called? Whenever we bleed from all different orifices, the stigmata.
Yes.
He actually had the stigmata.
Wow.
And it was the doctors. He's a top federal agent. In Florida, he was our top federal agent in Florida. So they did everything to try and get that stigmata to stop it. I mean, everything: his eyes, his ears, his anus, his penis. It was all bleeding. He went to Tibet. The trainer of the Dalai Lama was someone who he had trained with. That person couldn't stop the stigmata. And a friend of him, Jeffries, had an extensive relationship with the film industry because of his talent. And there was someone within the film industry named Godfrey Riggio, a very famous film producer. And Godfrey said that he knew someone that was able to get rid of this evil spirit in the same type of situation. So he dropped him off in this mesa just south of Los Angeles. And about 2 hours of pacing, along comes a motorcycle, and it's this 6-foot tall gay javelin thrower, this butch javelin thrower on a motorcycle, picking him up. And he I guess he figured, oh well, we got to go along with this. And so he jumped on the back of the motorcycle and they went up to the top of that mountain. Excuse me. And he explained this story to her of how this all happened. It was done within the confines of the Jesuits, and he had contacted a Jesuit black magician named Ivan Illich, who was in Moscow, and he studied a year with him doing potions, and that's what brought this spirit into him. Doing those rituals are what brings these spirits in. It's really one of the keys of this book, and it's mentioned in a few places about the danger of occult rituals and how the Urantia book uses the term in terms of how God lives within us. It describes this as the spirit within looking out. So everything that you are experiencing, if you're at the point of like Satanism and you're watching them kill children and drink their blood, if you've gotten past the stage of flinching and wanting to pull away, that's God telling you to run. Look away, because that's God seeing that as well. If you subject yourself continually to that to the point that you start to like it, you're toast. And that's God's abandoning you. So there's these are the people who are on the real trouble. You and I are good guys. We're going to the mansion worlds. We're in the service of God, and that's the end of it. The whole challenge of what we're supposed to be facing here, which is finding God or forsaking him, we've already faced that challenge, and we're okay. So we have to look at the people who are in the occult that we know, and from the Urantia book, that they're going to a very special trial on a planet called Jerusalem, which is a trial of Gabriel versus Lucifer. Satan is there too, taken off the planet in 1935. So now these two beings are on the block, and along with the people who are considered on this planet to be Lucifer's children, they're all going there, and they're going to face either accepting that they become as if they never were, or they would choose the fate worse than death, which is basically what we know right now is that they are just doing maintenance on the prison world, but they will be eventually rehabilitated to some form of universe service. If they follow Lucifer in this life, they will never be allowed out of this local universe. So as far as pursuing God into eternity and the Trinity and being trinitized as a spirit, that door is closed to the people who don't ask for forgiveness, who don't back away from the rituals, and don't recognize that they need to ask for forgiveness for pursuing that, and ask for God's help or Jesus' help. That's really what is at stake right here. It's life eternal that they are jeopardizing. So we have to think about them. We have to look at how we can bring that knowledge of in the Urantia book, the hard, cold facts about how the universe is structured. And they have to embrace that knowledge that they are jeopardizing something that they really don't know. They've been tricked into it through lies and through these rituals, through the use of sex. They're always sex rituals. So there's the lure of the material, to become a material person, to pursue money, make that your God. That's the tender trap that Lucifer sets for us, and Satan, along with the two beings, Caligastia and Dalagastia, because those two remain here, and that was what inhabited my friend Jeffrey. So these evil spirits do exist. They're still trying to spit in the face of Jesus and Jesus' world, which is our planet, the planet of the cross. And we're in this very tough situation. These are the final days of the 7 years of tribulation, which apparently end in the middle of next year. At which time I pray that Jesus can return, because there is so much that is unfixable on this planet. There's so much of free will that has gone into a dark direction that we can't be held responsible. We can't fix it. The people who really understand the deepness of the difficulties on this planet, and especially how the aliens have compromised us through screwing around with our DNA and those injections, all the stuff that's happening, all has to be wiped away. And exactly how God is going to separate the wheat from the chaff, apparently it's through some kind of Armageddon. And we just have to recognize that there's dangers coming. I've outlined them in my book, The Return of Nibiru, which might flip the planet over and wash the slate clean. That might be the way. And those who survive that event, apparently the Urantia book says that there's another planet already prepared in the event of that type of catastrophe. Now, the key is that we are the only people who got a Urantia book. Other planets did not. And there's another 4 million planets in this local universe who don't have a book like the Urantia book. So we have a completely extraordinary document that we can now present to these alien species through their emissaries who are able to show up on our tarmacs. They can fly in on a ship. We can hand them the Urantia book. We can outline exactly what they say, which is if their planets are doomed, there will be another planet that they will be taken to in the event that they are able to survive. Because once the civilization has taken hold on a planet, they have to continue irrespective of the survival of that planet. They don't know that, but we know that from the Urantia book. So we have to go back in our negotiation. We have to hand them the Urantia book. We have to hand them that knowledge that they need to return not to their planetary prince, who is in league with Lucifer. They have to go above that to their Melchizedeks, to other spirit beings who they probably have contact with, to find out, in fact, is there an exit strategy, or do we have to take over this planet, and kill all the humans on the planet? So when they find out there is a way out, the proper way out that's provided for them, and they've been lied to by their planetary prince, once that gets established, then we just say, well, you've got till a certain date. I know what the date is. You've got to a certain date. And if you aren't gone by then, when Jesus returns, you'll be taken to that trial of Gabriel versus Lucifer, and you've finished your life in terms of life eternal. So you better not be here when he returns.
I don't mean to interrupt. I don't mean to interject, David, but
You're not interjecting.
well, I wanted you to. Reason why I haven't said anything since the start of the show, because I wanted you to, the way you was throwing a lot of things out there, that's a good way to give, I guess, a synopsis of everything in your book and the Urantia book. And I was jotting some notes to everybody that's listening. People know that I do a lot of homework and research for my interviews. I tried my best. Hopefully I can do my due diligence for this interview. Mother's in the hospital, but I think everything's okay. Thinks everything's okay. But before we go further, and I did jot some notes. That's why I let you just, you were doing a good job with everything, laying the groundwork for this interview. So, but before we go further, David, what we need to do is we need to inform those who may be unfamiliar with the Urantia book. Since your book is based on the Urantia book with your own unique take on everything, we need to give a little background story to bring everyone up to speed on the book and to help lay the groundwork for the rest of the interview.
In my book, I start off with backstories, both from Jeffrey's backstory, his life as an artist and the CIA, as well as my backstory, talking about, I guess, having such a completely different upbringing. His upbringing was in having parents. His mother was a prostitute and his father was a criminal, a career criminal, like a 6'4" guy with gold teeth and tattoos, and held a knife all the time. So that type of New York gypsy criminal. From that background, we also look at my background, which looks more like a speed swimmer at 10, at 13 years old, bar mitzvah, nice yarmulke on my head. And, and by 17, I was going into third year engineering in our top engineering school in McGill University. And I got a record deal. I was always recording in my own songs since 12 years old. My mother bought me a tape recorder and I started recording songs, and I got a record deal at 17. So I decided, well, I'm going to go back to engineering at a later date, that story. And I signed the deal. I hit the road as a musician, and that became my life during those early years, up until producing disco jazz records in Toronto in 77. Out went disco, and in came punk music. And that was the end of my musical career. So I got into photography. I managed to marry a beauty that turned out to be what the movie Flashdance is written about. So there is actually an actual original couple, was myself and my first wife. And but she moved to LA because of the movie about her story, and that's where her future remained. But I stayed in Toronto and continued to work as a photographer for about 25 years. So I was a glamour photographer, entertainment photographer for a good portion of that time. But I was also using my studio as a place where I could have new readers come for the Urantia book, because I was presented the Urantia book in 77, and I fell in love with it. I thought it was the most impressive book I had ever read, and I devoted myself, as well as my studio, to a central place in Toronto that could have new readers come and experience the Urantia book. To give you a quick background in this document, it was something that has, I would say, a bit of a woo-woo beginning. Let's say in the early part.
I love woo. This show's about woo. So,
well, this is a major woo-woo moment for the actual initiation of this document's presentation to the world. It did start off with a person supposedly sleeping and writing while they were asleep. So the type of automatic writing took place. And the mother and the wife and all got involved. It was a family ordeal at first, and then they went to this man named Dr. Sadler, who had written books, psychic debunking books, to try and figure out what this guy was saying and what's wrong with him or what's right with him. So they started to study him. And it was with the intention of getting, apparently, using him to organize a process where a group of people will get together every Wednesday, and a different chapter out of the Urantia book would be presented. And how it was presented was it would appear spontaneously in a safe in that place in Chicago on Wednesday. And they would take it out of the safe and they would read it to the people who were interested in it, and the people would ask questions and react to the document. So this is around 1920s, 25, up to 1935, this was taking place. And the questions raised in people's minds would then be addressed in the next time that document would be transmitted, because they were instructed to put the document back into the safe. It invariably would disappear and reappear a week later. But there would be very small changes that would be made. And as for instance, to give you an anecdote, one sentence was, and Jesus had a very good sense of humor for a Jew. And the people in the room all laughed. Of course, we've all been experiencing Jerry Seinfeld for the last number of years, so we have some kind of an idea about Jewish humor. But apparently, 2,000 years ago, the Jewish people were not a humorous people. They were very self-serious about their religion, about their whole life was all governed by these 618 laws, and they were a different people. The comedic side only came out of the pressures of ghetto life. So that statement about Jesus having a good sense of humor for a Jew, when it was retransmitted, because of the laughs it got, which were not intended, that sentence was omitted the next time it was, because they listened to it and were expecting to hear that line, it wasn't there. So that was the type of refinement. They were definitely listening to what was happening in our mind. And as you would read this book, a question would come up into your mind, and invariably the next paragraph would address that question. So it's a perfect teaching document. Also because it starts off from the macroscopic, which is God and the nature of God and eternity. And then it builds up through our local universe, our own planet, and then the life and teachings of Jesus. So those are the four main sections. The whole first section on the super universe and the Trinity, all of that is sort of a little difficult. Anything to do with infinity and eternity is difficult for human minds to understand. So by starting off from the macroscopic and working down in the other direction to the microscopic, to the life and teachings in our own lives, how that's applied in our own lives, we're not used to this type of document. But it is actually a supreme document, and it's just that we do in the opposite. We make observations, we form theories. They eventually become laws as we can prove these, and they're repeatable through the scientific process. So we have a different way of approaching truth because we can only do it through observation. Yet the Urantia book presents truth in a fashion that the first section is written, footnoted by an individual who says that he is sat in the personal presence of the Trinity, and he knows whereof he speaks. It's a sentence you'd never expect in any book, but this is actually what you eventually come to appreciate, is that we have an individual who comes from the central universe that tells us about the true nature of God, and that God is love, and that's the way we access them. So when I'm looking at an individual like Jeffrey and another friend of mine like Jim, who are both members of the occult, when I would see Jeffrey, when I would come to his house every Sunday and he would have a nice meal ready and we'd laugh about all kinds of things and work on little projects, that is all a form of love. And he even said about his new wife, I feigned love through my other 6 marriages. This, my seventh marriage, is the first time I really feel like I've fallen in love. And love will have saved his soul, literally, because that's exactly what Satan and Lucifer are attempting to wrestle away from you. And they will not do it through love, they will do it through fear. And when he realized that, and when he was taught that that's the way to get rid of those evil spirits, he followed that motorcyclist's instructions, and he shrugged off that individual who would want him to react in a fearful way. And he just kept on shrugging it off as if it was inconsequential. And after about a year, this spirit left him and the stigmata stopped. So we have a free will choice. We're being wrestled with that all the time. It's the choices that we make on a daily basis that is the quality of our life. And that's precisely what God is interested in. Nothing else other than our experiences of choosing God or forsaking him.
So well said, David. So there seems to be a lot of similarities in collaboration with the Bible to a degree. So what are some similarities and differences between the Urantia book and the Bible? Also, and with all due respect, how can we, for the skeptical minds out there, how can we know that the book is accurate and not misleading those to accept like a new age religion?
Oh, a very, very important question. I'm glad you asked that because it's critical. When you read the Urantia book, if you have love in your heart and you've already found God, chances are it's there somewhere, even if it has been marred by ritual and the bad experiences that you can put aside. When you read the word, a bell rings. When you find about Jesus' life, you read the charge he gave to the apostles when he told them, blessed are the poor, for they shall inherit the earth. When you read that and the actual words that he said to the apostles, there will be no question in your mind that this is Jesus speaking. And everything that you will read, and there's over 800 pages of in-depth about his entire life, his traveling through the Roman Empire. I mean, with incredible accuracy so clearly this is written from beings who were there and witnessing it at the time, as apparently the entire universe, his entire local universe of 4 million worlds, they were all focused on our tiny but highly honored planet as to what was happening to their creator son while he was living the final incarnation before he would be able to take on complete control and supremacy of this local universe. It was required of him. So they were all watching exactly how he was dealing with that. And as you read the experiences he had, for instance, when he was coming back to Tarentum from a tour of the Roman Empire and he was returning home, he met at the boat dock a couple that was actually quarreling, and the husband actually struck his wife, and Jesus, of course, interceded to protect the woman. And the discussion and the way in which he diffused the situation, the questions he asked, and what he brought out of that man at the very end, as they were leaving, and this whole transaction only took place probably within 5 minutes. But in that 5 minutes, he was able to explain to that man how this woman is to be treated, because here's a woman who has provided him a home, a love life, food at the table, but most importantly, she's taken on the huge responsibility of raising his kids. So it was a teary moment for all, including those two that were previously fighting. So there are many situations like that. We have no understanding of it. The apostles weren't there to report on it. And even some of these situations that they were trying to report on, they had no understanding because they were literally happening on a celestial level. So we now have all the clear detail of all that. And the net result is that you will only love Jesus more. You will only be more convinced that he is the author and finisher of their faith. Not the Bible is not, the Bible is not the author and finisher of their faith, it's Jesus. And the Bible is a report by the apostles, but more importantly, it's actually documented. It's the people who worked with the apostles. It was their students of the apostles. The apostles didn't want to write the Bible because they knew that Jesus only wrote in sand, and that it wasn't the intention to write something like that, but it was the insistence on the Church of Rome that caused them to write a Bible. That's not to say that it's not a document that hasn't really fostered Jesus and his gospel for the last 2,000 years and changed the world. It has. But there is now a more accurate version, which will not make you look with any type of, it won't make you look down on the Bible. What it'll do is it'll put it into historic context. You'll understand the changes that were done by kings. You'll understand all the involvement of the pagans to make it something that could be the religion of the Roman Empire. So they made all kinds of concessions to the pagans. There are things that we honestly have to look at ultimately about the Bible as being ultimately the perfect word of God, which it isn't, unfortunately. Every word that came out of Jesus' mouth is the word of God. And when you read the Urantia book, you will see that it's accurately reported. And where a lot of our confusion comes is going to be from the Old Testament, which is saying things like an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, where Jesus said to turn the other cheek. there are things within the Jewish religion that was at war with it within them, with Moloch and the worshippers of the golden idols and all that was going on within the Jewish people from the day that they left Babylon and came back from captivity. They set up the Temple of Solomon, which was the worship of Lucifer and Satan. And that Temple of Solomon was where the two groups that were entrusted by the Babylonians to maintain the control over the Jewish people was the Cohens and the Levites. These two groups of people, which are had an historic role in, as well as the Pharisees, to have put Jesus to death. They were not the Jewish people, because the average Jewish person of that day loved Jesus and followed Jesus. The Pharisees, just as today the Zionists, are not to be looked on as the same group of people that are going to the synagogue like Jesus did and the apostles did, and studying the Torah. The Torah and the Talmud, which is their document, are two totally different books. And the Talmud is an occult document, and it underlines the difference between the two groups of Jews that was in Jesus' day as the Pharisees and those who went to the synagogue like Jesus did. And those who we see today, we see Zionism, we see the Middle East erupting with the same problems that existed back in Jesus' day. None of that ever got addressed, except that into the mix of that came the military-industrial complex.
Do you think the Bible has caused a lot of this confusion and chaos throughout time? Because, not saying that things within the Bible aren't accurate, like there's a lot of truth. It's a very important historical document. But at the same time, on the flip side of the coin, it was men, and how do we know those men didn't have some type of agenda up their sleeve when they edited certain books of the Bible, and then they're throughout time, this causes this schism within the mind and this almost like this ego type mental complex, and it just throughout time it created a lot of chaos, confusion, and wars and things like that.
And a house divided, all the different versions. The Urantia Book says that the secular world will hardly capitulate with a sect divided Christendom. As long as we are all these different groups, how can you understand that Jesus is the one voice when you see all these different interpretations? All of that is unified in the Urantia Book. It sort of puts the institutions aside, the religious institutions we put aside, and we follow Jesus' teachings, which is the kingdom of God is within. And that's something that the priests have never been able to accept, because that pushes them out of a job. They're supposed to be interceding between God and the parishioner. So Jesus never said that. Jesus never told the apostles to form churches. But that was the Jewish mind. The Jewish mind was to build synagogues and organizations. They continue to be that same thing. But the Jewish people are not to be thought of in that fashion. These are the Jewish rulers and leaders, and the same thing is true today. These people do not necessarily reflect the Jewish mind. The Jewish mind, especially, for instance, here in America, I did some work for the National Jewish Fund. They knew of my engineering work that I did for the Canadian military and the British military. And as a protective strategy is bomb-proofing and strengthening of a hardening of our targets. And we do that through this alien technology that I basically adapted with their help. The non-breathers helped me to adapt this to our own purposes. So there was definitely an opportunity. And Jeffrey helped me seize that. He got together with me and basically prepped me for a presentation in the Israeli embassy in Washington. And I gave them all the plans for an Israeli home, a home that could be built in these what we call occupied territories, that would be literally bomb-proof. It would stand up to a nuclear explosion and even shield the inhabitants of radiation. So this is a future home that I designed with their help, and I presented that to them. I presented a device that could sit on the top of their roofs so that the roof wouldn't take any overhead impact from an explosion, which is what shock and awed the people in Baghdad that had their houses falling on top of them. So that can be prevented through a device that I invented. A version of that was put underneath our Humvees and personnel carriers to protect our troops from IEDs on the road. Yeah, so we haven't lost a soldier since 2009, since I gave them that device. So they've been actively involved with us ever since, I guess, I signed my agreement with the military. And I just saw at a certain point the type of danger that the Israelis were in. And as a Jew, I felt that not having served in a war, and it was the same thing with my work for the Canadian military. My father had flown during the Second World War, the Mosquito bombers, and he liberated the Jewish camps, So my father put his own life aside and took all kinds of dangers, flying the entire war, the Mosquito bombers, which were flying ahead of the big Lancaster bombers. My mother also was a product of that, a Jew who was living in London, escaped from the Ukraine during the Bolshevik Revolution and the pogroms in Ukraine. And consequently, they were able to survive it. So I've been living in Canada, living in the United States half my life, enjoying Florida, the beautiful weather. I mean, I grew up in the 60s, record companies were worth something back then, and we, touring, and those were great days. The 60s were great days. Jimi Hendrix Taylor was making my clothes. Life was great. And, but all of that slid downhill, and for reasons that I believe have to do with the occult wanting to take over a certain date. It's the transition from the age of Pisces to the age of Aquarius. So those who are really, informed about how these things are relevant is truly important. Uh-oh.
Yep. Lost your video feed.
Huh. Take a break.
Child trafficking, because I'm trying to expose that. And people have a thirst of knowledge for that. Maybe we can briefly, but I want to touch onto the Greada Treaty and more of that.
You're also in your defense, you're also a good looking guy, and you have a good sounding voice. Well, so those are features.
Appreciate it. The microphone helps, but in the past, you always have trolls, that haters and people that you got that Southern drawl, and he must be unintelligent, because he has a Southern drawl and he has this accent, but whatever. Right. But so man. So
I live down south here. I'm in Florida. I love the accent, to me I love accents. I like the British accent. I like the Australian. We're hearing lots of Australians now because of all that happened with COVID. So I hear lots of Australian accent. They have a very interesting way of speaking.
They do. Yep. I might.
Yeah.
So before we go too much further,
Okay.
David, and please, and I want to go into more of the alien aspect, the Greada Treaty, a little bit more into Jeffrey Liu, but you laid a really good foundation of everything. So, but I got to ask you this, and I don't want to, like I said, I don't want to stay too much on this, but with your name, are you related to L. Ron Hubbard?
Not in the slightest. Once again, here this is something that I hear often enough, but I'm closely related to Old Mother Hubbard, I think, but not L. Ron.
I was just curious, because if
he's a scourge. He's a scourge.
If you were like, I'm like, okay, there's two different. If David Lee Hubbard is related to L. Ron Hubbard, then David Lee Hubbard must have taken his own path, because it's completely seems a little different than Scientology,
Oh boy, oh yeah, absolutely. Scientology is definitely the left-hand path. Yeah. No, I'm on the right hand of God. There's no question about that.
So, man, there's so many things where I'll have to get you back on, and we still have about an hour and 10 minutes left, but still, it's just so much information to go into, so
how about this? How about you asking me questions? I'm going to give you shorter answers rather than such long answers. I'll give you 30 or minute answers, and that way we can go through more questions with you. I think that would be more helpful.
But if you feel the need to go into a little bit more detail, please. I feel like this may not be the first time or the first and only time that you're going to be on this show. So please don't worry about that. If I need to interject, I'll interject. David.
Okay.
Just don't take no offense by that, you know.
No,
But
your questions are good. All your questions so far have been right on, and I'm glad you asked them. So
I
yeah,
tried.
keep going.
I
Keep at it.
tried, you know, I've been doing this a long time and it's no excuse, but I'm not quite as prepared as I would like to be, you know, with my mother and all that. But I just asked my wife when I went to use the restroom how everything's going, and everything seems to be going good. So, um,
That's important.
you know,
Families first. And like you said, we can talk tomorrow. We can talk next week. You know, I mean, especially what's going on in hospitals, it's such a dangerous place for her to be. I mean, if my mother is in the hospital, I'd be trying to get her out of there as fast as possible, get her
I know,
back on her feet, you know, because there are all kinds of protocols. Don't let her be tested for COVID, as a for instance, you know.
man, I'm a unique breed in my family, David.
Mm.
That's my, they don't, I've talked about things about UFOs, conspiracies, the occult, the paranormal, ancient mysteries within my family, but only like on a kindergarten level. You know what I mean? They're not, my parents both have had the jab.
Oh,
So I,
so they're already in danger.
I've already,
Yeah.
and then my mother's a very, you know, with all due respect, it's just honest truth. She's older and she's a larger woman, you know, and it scares me, you know, it increases my anxiety some because even though she's not awakened to the world and this reality, you know, that others watching this, are, but I love her to death, you know.
Sure.
I'm not the man. She basically raised me, you know. My dad wasn't quite, can ask for a better father now, you know. He's come a long ways, but my mother basically raised, I'm the only child. She, you know, we was poor. She did her best. I don't know. She was up underneath the vehicle fixing her own. We didn't have the money to go fix a vehicle. You know, she was fixing the
Mm-hmm.
vehicle when I was a little kid. You know, while my dad was off working
Mm-hmm.
and doing other things. But you know, it. But yes, you know, I worry about her. But enough of that. Let's go ahead and move into. Let's go a little bit about how did you come across. I know you already talked about it, David, but go a little bit more detail with Jeffrey. And what did he bring to the table, you know, to where what inspired you to write this book, and what are, and how did you know to trust him? How did you know to that you weren't being misguided by some type of maybe controlled opposition or something like that, you know?
Well, I obviously was making a study of him as well as my other friend, Jim, that I mentioned. I was studying the two of them, looking at basically what is going to be decided as to their future. You know, where is there a red line when they talk about pursuing Lucifer, being a child of Lucifer? What exactly? Because it's not just on initiation. There's no question that once you get initiated, you might be on a slippery slope to Satanism and becoming a child of Lucifer. That might be a starting point, but that doesn't mean that you have to pursue it with both hands and become a 33rd degree Mason or whatever. You know, it's possible that a person can have just found out about it, went through initiation, and then boom, they died. Well, I don't think they're going to be judged on that. It's once again, it's just an experience. But the thing is, it's an important experience because that's when they start to get their claws into you. They're getting you to do things that are reprehensible. They're getting you to think that, oh, well, God would never want me now after doing this. And all the things that happen in rituals are all meant to take you away from God, for no other purpose. You might think, and everything else, you know, might think, oh, well, I get good business connections. I'm getting this, I'm getting that out of it. None of it turns out to be worth it, you know, because it's all a test. And when you realize that everything is a test, every day, every decision, you're being watched constantly. Everything you think is being listened to. There's no secrets in the universe. You are being highly studied by all kinds of beings. Definitely you have guardian angels. We know from the Urantia book that when you get to what they call third circle in terms of your progression, that they are gauging constantly based on the quality of your decisions and their crisis relationship. As you move through these psychic circles and you come closer and closer to God, you get eventually two guardian angels. But those guardian angels are recording angels. They're recording everything you think and see and do and trying to guide you into better directions as best they can. But everything that is going on in your life is being watched. So to think that you can keep something secret or what's going on with the occult, there's no secrecy in the occult. Not to the beings who are meaningful or important to their life eternal. They're seeing everything. But of course, that isn't being told to the initiate, exactly the significance of becoming a member of the occult, whether it's the Wiccan or any other organization. Even the Masons, if you're maybe a third-degree Mason, I see them all the time, and you'd say, oh, that's a good guy. He's on this network and he's saying this good thing, and he's obviously a nice guy, and he's always on the side of right. Yeah, well, he's on the side of right until it's time to call the chit in, and you find out that, well, no, I want you to use the fact that you've been established on this network as being a truth giver, and we want you to lie. We lie on this one important point. That's what controlled opposition is all about. The fact is that if you're a third-degree Mason, you've already done things that they're going to lean on you for. And as long as you're in that type of situation, you can never be 100% true to God. So it's a real problem, this whole thing of initiation into occult organizations. And that's where the work that you and I have to do. It's to bring those people into the light. A lot of your listeners are probably like you and I. They are just living our life. We like to play baseball. I mean, we like to, we like a lot of the same things. We're part of them. Canadian American culture, Canada and the United States have very, very similar cultures, as you probably have noticed. So I would say that we're Western civilization. People in Europe, my sisters in Denmark, it is the same mentality. It's not like you don't have something completely different just because these are different countries and have slightly different rules and laws. The fact is that we want fresh water, we want clean air, we want a good place to raise our kids, we want to have some good times with our friends and laugh, and we want the same things. And I was involved with something called the Festival of the Family, which was a United Nations thing in 1995. And in the setting up of this event, we told the different religions who participated at the Royal Ontario Museum that they could talk about only things related to the family. Nothing to do with their rituals or their dogma or any of that stuff. It's not to be talked about at this. It was about, I think, 7-day event. And during those 7 days, you would find the Muslims and the Jews, everybody was in harmony. There was not a moment of conflict because we were all focusing on our similarities rather than our differences. And our differences are being used deliberately to disempower us from being an army for God, which is the important thing. It's the people choosing God, which is what is saving them, not how well they are ascribing to certain dogma or ritual in an organization. That's not what is being evaluated on a daily basis. It's the quality of our decisions, the quality of the way we live and the way we treat each other. You asked me earlier about the Bible. Jesus did make constant reference to the Old Testament teaching, especially the prophets and the things that they said.
Do you want to help support Beyond Forbidden and receive extra content that's not seen anywhere else? By becoming a patron, a few things you will receive are the full-length 90-minute or 120-minute podcast episode. Members will also receive a private link of the video podcast and will only be exclusive to Patreon members. In-person, face-to-face interviews with some of the most well-known, respected researchers, behind-the-scenes footage of interviews not seen anywhere else, and that's just a few perks. So what do you have to lose? Cut out one brain-rotting, overly processed Happy Meal a month that doesn't do anything beneficial for your mind, body, and spirit, and become a Patreon for just $5.